Chapter 4. The First Test. The test came quickly. The royal table was filled with delicacies, meats offered to idols, wines consecrated to pagan gods. For any young man starving after months of siege, it would have been an irresistible temptation. Daniel, with a firm but respectful voice, "I beg you, do not force me to defile myself with the king's delicacies." Ashpenaz worried, "Young man, I fear for my life. If the king sees you thinner than the other young men of your age, you will endanger my head." But Daniel had a plan. He approached the steward. "Daniel, test your servants for 10 days. Give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the king's delicacies." The miracle of faithfulness. 10 days passed. When the moment of comparison arrived, something extraordinary had happened. Daniel and his friends were not only healthy, they were radiant. Steward, astonished, "How is this possible?" They ate only vegetables and water, yet they looked like princes. God had honored the faithfulness of his young servants. This was only the first of many miracles that would mark their lives in Babylon. Chapter 5. Divine Wisdom. 3 years passed. Daniel and his friends had become the most learned of all the young men at court. Narrator. And to these 4 young men God gave knowledge and intelligence in all literature and wisdom. But to Daniel he gave understanding in every vision and dream. When they were finally presented to King Nebuchadnezzar, the result was extraordinary. Nebuchadnezzar, impressed after testing them, "In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, I found them 10 times more knowledgeable than all the magicians and astrologers in the whole kingdom." Chapter 6. The Dream That Changed History. One night, in the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that deeply troubled him. It was not an ordinary dream. It was a prophetic vision. Chapter 7. The Vision of the Kingdoms. Text already rewritten previously with all numbers written out in full. The shadow falls upon the holy city. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, when the morning sun cast long shadows across the golden walls of Jerusalem, a darkness was already gathering on the horizon. The year was 605 before Christ, and the mighty empire of Babylon, like a ravenous lion, was awakening to devour the nations. King Nebuchadnezzar, whose name struck terror into the hearts of kings and commoners alike, had set his eyes upon the jewel of the Middle East, Jerusalem, the city of David, the dwelling place of the Most High God. The siege begins. The sound of marching feet echoed across the Judean hills like thunder before a storm. Thousands upon thousands of Babylonian soldiers, their bronze armor gleaming in the desert sun, surrounded the walls of Jerusalem. The siege had begun, and with it, the fulfillment of prophecies spoken by Jeremiah and other servants of the Lord. For 3 years, Jehoiakim had served Nebuchadnezzar as a vassal, paying tribute and bowing to Babylonian power. But pride, that ancient enemy of kings, had whispered in his ear. Why should the son of David bow to a pagan king? He had asked himself. And so he rebelled, sealing not only his own fate but that of his beloved city. The young nobles of Judah. Among the treasures that Nebuchadnezzar sought were not gold or silver, but something far more precious, the minds and hearts of Judah's finest young men. As the city walls trembled under the assault of Babylonian siege engines, orders were given to select the cream of Jewish nobility. "Bring me young men," commanded the king, "without blemish, well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and able to stand in the king's palace." Among these chosen ones were 4 young men whose names would echo through eternity. Daniel, whose name means "God is my judge"; Hananiah, meaning Jehovah has been gracious; Mishael, who is what God is; and Azariah, Jehovah has helped. The moment of truth. Picture, if you will, that fateful morning when Jerusalem's gates were finally breached. The sound of splintering wood and clashing metal filled the air as Babylonian soldiers poured into the streets like a flood. The Temple of Solomon, that magnificent house of worship built 480 years earlier, stood helpless as foreign hands reached for its sacred vessels. But this was no random act of conquest. This was the hand of Almighty God moving in judgment upon his people. For decades, the prophets had warned, "Turn from your wicked ways. Stop worshipping idols. Remember the covenant of your fathers." Yet the people had hardened their hearts like Pharaoh of old. Daniel's journey into captivity. As young Daniel walked in chains toward Babylon, did he understand that he was not just a prisoner, but a chosen instrument in God's grand design? The 800-mile journey across desert sands was more than a march to exile. It was a pilgrimage toward destiny. Behind him lay everything he had ever known: the temple where he had worshipped, the streets where he had played as a child, the tomb of King David, the very soil that God had promised to Abraham. Ahead lay an unknown future in a land of strange gods and stranger customs. The training of champions. In Babylon, the 4 Hebrew young men were enrolled in a 3-year program designed to transform them into Babylonian courtiers. They were to learn the language and literature of the Chaldeans, to eat the king's delicacies, and to drink his wine. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself. Here we see the first great test of faith. How easy it would have been to rationalize, "We're captives now. We must survive. Surely God understands our situation." But Daniel understood something profound, that faithfulness to God is not determined by circumstances but by choice. The God who reveals secrets. When King Nebuchadnezzar's troubling dream awakened him in the night, sweating and trembling, he demanded not only an interpretation, but that his wise men tell him what he had dreamed. "If you cannot tell me my dream and its interpretation," he thundered, "you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses made a dunghill." The magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers stood helpless. "There is no man on earth who can tell the king this thing," they cried. Death sentences were pronounced upon all the wise men of Babylon, including Daniel and his 3 friends. Each metal represented a kingdom that would rise and fall in the course of human history. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was the head of gold, magnificent but temporary. After it would come the Medo-Persian Empire, then Greece under Alexander, then Rome with its iron strength. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The fiery furnace years passed, and Nebuchadnezzar erected a golden image 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide on the plain of Dura. The sound of music was the signal for all peoples, nations, and languages to bow down and worship. But when the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music played, 3 Hebrew young men remained standing. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Babylonian names given to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, faced the king's fury. "Who is that God who will deliver you out of my hands?" Nebuchadnezzar roared as he commanded the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Their response echoes across the centuries. "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up." The 4th man. As the 3 Hebrew young men walked unbound in the midst of the flames, King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement. "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire?" he asked his counselors. "True, O king," they replied. "Look," he exclaimed, "I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Even in judgment, even in exile, even in the furnace of affliction, God had not abandoned his people. The same God who had walked with Adam in Eden, who had wrestled with Jacob at Peniel, who had appeared to Moses in the burning bush, was walking with his faithful servants in Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. The king's transformation. That day, something fundamental changed in the heart of the mightiest monarch on earth. The man who had destroyed Jerusalem and carried away its people found himself proclaiming, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him." Here we see the beautiful irony of God's ways. The very king who had been the instrument of judgment upon Jerusalem became a witness to God's power and faithfulness. The fall of Jerusalem was not the end of God's plan. It was the beginning of his testimony to the nations. The handwriting on the wall. Years later, under King Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom of Babylon would face its own judgment. As the king and his nobles drank wine from the sacred vessels taken from Jerusalem's temple, mocking the God of Israel, mysterious fingers appeared and wrote upon the palace wall, "Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin." Once again, Daniel was called to interpret divine revelation. "God has numbered your kingdom and finished it," he declared. "You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians." That very night Belshazzar was slain, and Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. The eternal lesson. The book of Daniel teaches us that the rise and fall of earthly kingdoms are but chapters in God's eternal story. Jerusalem fell because God's people had forsaken their covenant, but even in judgment, mercy was remembered. Through faithful servants like Daniel and his 3 friends, the light of truth continued to shine in the darkness of exile. The young man who had been torn from his homeland at 17 years of age would live to see multiple empires rise and fall. He would receive visions of the end times, prophesy the coming of the Messiah with mathematical precision, and prove that faithfulness to God transcends circumstances, cultures, and centuries. When we face our own Babylons, times of testing, exile, and apparent defeat, we must remember that our God is sovereign over all kingdoms, all powers, and all principalities. What appears to be an ending may be God's new beginning. What seems like defeat may be the setup for his greatest victory. The fall of Jerusalem was not the failure of God's plan. It was the fulfillment of his justice and the preparation for his mercy. Through Daniel's courage, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith, and the unshakable truth that the God of heaven reigns supreme, we learn that no earthly power can separate God's people from his love and purpose. The kingdom that will never be destroyed is still coming. And until that day, like Daniel, we are called to be faithful, whether in palaces or prisons, whether in prosperity or persecution, whether standing before kings or kneeling before our God. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Daniel 12:4.